When I was 17, circumstances forced me to spend a couple of months away from home. I ended up crashing at my cousin Noah's place, a creaky old house a few miles outside of Milwaukee. The building was a relic, built in the early 1900s and patched together with renovations that never fully hid its original skeleton. I was expecting rustic charm. What I got was a quiet dread that would haunt my nights. Noah's house was massive, filled with narrow hallways, steep staircases, and endless corridors that all led to dead ends. It had an old meets modern vibe, where vintage fixtures clashed with modern touches in a desperate effort to blend past and present. But no matter how hard they tried, something about the place always felt off, especially at night. I initially chalked it up to an eerie atmosphere that comes with old houses until the sound started. My first night, I lay on a second-hand futon in a spare room that smelled faintly of mothballs and forgotten memories. Around 2 a.m., I heard a creak from the old wooden floors that wasn't just the building settling. Then a soft murmur drifted from the vent on the wall, a whisper that felt almost like a voice calling out. I paused my TikTok scrolling and listened, wondering if it was merely the wind playing tricks. The next few nights, the whispers grew clearer. At first, it was just a faint susurration that made my skin crawl. Then one night, it broke through in distinct fragments. Don't let him sleep. Wake up. Remember. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering, staring at the vent like a portal to another world. I convinced myself it might be a faulty HVAC system and tried to force sleep despite the dread. But each subsequent night deepened the terror. One evening, I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the long, dim hallway to the rusty vent. There, the whisper came again, clearer than before. You must listen. Don't ignore. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, and for a long, agonizing minute heard nothing but a hollow wind. Then, as if guided by an unseen force, I heard slow, deliberate breathing, not my own, emanating from the vent. My pulse shot up as I staggered back, almost tripping over my own feet. I bolted back to my room and slammed the door, my mind racing with terror and confusion. That night, with Noah away at work, I stayed awake in the oppressive silence of the old house. Every creak of the wood and every distant murmur amplified my fear. Throughout the restless hours, the voices shifted, and the breathing wandered from room to room in my mind. I couldn't tell if it was all in my head, or if something truly lurked inside those vents. Morning light barely eased my unease when I confided in Noah. He brushed off my fears with a gruff laugh, claiming the old ducks were just noisy and temperamental. But deep down, I knew something was inexplicably wrong. That evening, I set up my phone near the vent and pretended to fall asleep, determined to catch the phenomenon on tape. Around 3 a.m., as the house sank into deep silence, my phone picked up a new sound. I was jolted awake by a clear phrase. It's not safe. Wake him up. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I forced myself out of bed and, with my phone recording, crept back to the vent. I stood there in pitch darkness, straining to catch every fragment of the whispered warning, my heart pounding in terror. I began to notice multiple voices, overlapping murmurs that formed warning phrases like, "Hide" and "Run." Each whisper sent a shiver down my spine, making every shadow and creak feel sinister. I could almost believe there was someone or something that needed to be protected. A him that the voice spoke of. But I couldn't figure out who that was or what the message meant. The next day, unable to shake the terror, I examined the vent up close. I found the metal grill ajar, as if someone had pried it open deliberately. Noah swore he hadn't touched it, and the deeper I looked, the more questions I had. There was no mechanical explanation, just the sense that the house itself was hiding a dark secret. I spent that day researching the property's history. I learned that the house once belonged to a reclusive man rumored to have dabbled in occult practices. Neighbors whispered about strange rituals and a man whose voice would echo through the halls, warning of impending doom. It seemed that some of that dark legacy had seeped into the very walls of Noah's house. As the nights grew colder, the haunting phenomena became routine. Every night at 3 a.m. I would wake to the low murmur of voices and the sound of labored breathing echoing through the halls. There were moments when a heavy scraping, like metal dragging along wood, sent me into a frenzied panic. I began to dread the dark, knowing that sleep meant reliving that terror. One particularly chilling night, amidst the chorus of whispers and oppressive silence, I heard a new, resolute command.
"Protect him! You must protect him!" This directive shattered whatever remnants of sleep I had left. I raced into Noah's room, shaking him awake with urgency, but he dismissed it as a bad dream. Even his skeptical laughter couldn't dispel the deep chill that had taken hold of me. On my final night at that house, I decided I had to get to the bottom of it. I summoned every ounce of courage and removed the vent cover entirely.
Kneeling before the dark opening, I peered into the narrow, dusty metal passage that lay beyond. Inside, the whisper returned, now clear and commanding. "You have seen, now you must act." I stumbled back in terror, my mind reeling with questions. Who was he that needed protection? Was it Noah or someone I hadn't yet met? The voice cut off abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence that felt accusatory. I hastily reattached the cover, and for the rest of the night, the sounds subsided into a heavy quiet. Yet every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear that haunting command echoing in my mind. Don't let him sleep. Noah left the house a week later, and I never looked back. Even now, years later, when I'm alone in my new place, I sometimes catch a fleeting shadow moving against the wall or hear a faint murmur in the dead of night. I never learned who he was or what the voice demanded, only that the house held a secret too dark for words. It was as if the very walls whispered warnings that went unheeded, a legacy of unease passed down through a cursed property. And if you ever find yourself in a place that isn't your own, where the walls murmur and the vents seem to breathe, remember my story, and whatever you do, don't ignore the voices in the vents. Echoes of the abandoned motel. A midnight encounter. I was driving along a lonely highway when my car abruptly began to sputter and slow. Forced to pull over on an empty stretch of road, I realized I had no choice but to seek shelter. In the distance, a dilapidated motel emerged through the mist, its flickering neon sign the only hint of life. I steered my car toward the structure, a mix of reluctance and necessity urging me onward. The motel, long abandoned and shrouded in fog, stood as a relic of a bygone era. Its facade bore the scars of time, peeling paint and boarded-up windows that whispered forgotten secrets. As I parked in the cracked lot, the only sound was the rhythmic tap of falling rain and my own uneasy heartbeat. I stepped out into the cool, damp air, the mist clinging to my skin like a spectral shroud. The neon sign buzzed intermittently, casting weak, eerie glows onto the silent building. I hesitated before the entrance, feeling an inexplicable pull despite the prevailing sense of dread. The door, slightly ajar as if inviting me inside, creaked open with a soft protest when I pushed it. A chill ran down my spine as I crossed the threshold into the dimly lit lobby. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with neglect and memories. Faded wallpaper hung in ragged strips on cracked walls, and the scent of damp decay permeated the air. A long-forgotten reception desk, covered in a thin layer of dust, stood silent in the corner. I called out softly, "Hello?" But the only response was the echo of my own voice. I decided to explore further, my footsteps echoing on the worn-out carpet as I passed deserted corridors. Each room I passed seemed to tell a story of lives once lived, now sealed away in silence. A persistent sound of distant tapping and soft murmuring guided me deeper into the building. I followed it cautiously, my flashlight beam dancing over faded signs and tarnished metal fixtures. At the end of one long corridor, I found a door slightly different from the rest, its wood darkened and intricately carved with patterns I couldn't quite decipher. The tapping grew louder behind that door, as if someone was patiently waiting for someone to notice. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open and peered into a narrow, poorly lit room. The room was small and sparse, with nothing but a single old chair in its center and a large, cracked mirror hanging on the far wall. In the mirror's reflection, I saw a shadow that wasn't mine, a vague figure, almost human, lingering in the far corner. For a heartbeat, I froze, unsure whether I was witnessing a trick of the light or something more. Then, a soft, almost sorrowful whisper resonated from the depths of the room. "Remember. Please remember." I backed away slowly, my mind reeling as I attempted to grasp the meaning behind the words. Leaving the room in haste, I found myself retracing my steps through the silent corridors of the motel. The entire building now felt alive with an unseen presence, its air heavy with melancholy and regret. Every creak and rustle seemed laden with the weight of untold stories. Outside in the lobby, I noticed a faded notice pinned to the wall. It read, in worn-out lettering, "Lost souls and broken dreams. This motel remembers." My heart pounded as I absorbed the significance of these words, a memorial to lives cut short or forgotten. The atmosphere felt almost tangible, as if the motel itself was mourning for its past. I decided that I could not spend another minute in that oppressive environment. I hurriedly made my way back to my car, the sound of my hurried steps blending with the quiet lament of the building. Once inside, I locked the doors and started the engine, every turn of the key filled with mounting apprehension. Driving away, I stole one last glance in the rearview mirror at the ghostly outline of the motel fading into the fog. As I merged onto the highway once more, the echoes of that mournful place continued to haunt my thoughts. The rain began to subside and a thin layer of fog clung to the road like memories that refused to dissipate. But the silence inside my car was now broken by a subtle, rhythmic tapping and the whisper of the wind, almost like the motel's distant call. A sense of loss and lingering sorrow accompanied every mile I drove away from that place. Later, when I stopped at a rest area to collect my thoughts, I found a local news article tucked under the windshield wiper. It detailed a long-forgotten tragedy at the motel, a series of mishaps and heartaches that ended in sorrow many years ago. The article mentioned that the motel had once been a vibrant shelter for weary travelers, but after a fateful incident, it had been abandoned. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the lingering presence of those who still hoped to be remembered. The experience changed me in subtle ways. Every so often, on quiet nights, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in a store window, or hear a faint, indistinct murmur that recalls that night. It serves as a reminder that some places hold on to their memories so tightly that they never let go. I now wonder if our paths will cross again with these lingering echoes of sorrow. I share this story not to frighten, but as a reminder that sometimes the past reaches out to us in silent, unexpected ways. If you ever find yourself on a lonely road with no place to turn, heed the quiet calls of history and memory that might be waiting in the darkness. And if you ever hear a soft whisper or see a fleeting shadow that prompts you to pause, remember that some echoes of the past are meant to remain undisturbed. In the end, I drove on with a heavy heart, knowing that the motel's memories would remain etched in my mind, a quiet, persistent reminder of what it means to be remembered. And when the silence in the night calls out with voices of old, I listen in respectful silence, ever aware that some stories refuse to fade with time. The phantom fuel stop. A midnight highway encounter. I was driving on an endless stretch of deserted highway, my fuel gauge dipping dangerously low. The night was thick with darkness and a heavy, brooding fog that swallowed the stars. I'd been on the road for hours, chasing a promise of a new start, when the needle forced me to search for a gas station. In the distance, a flickering neon sign sliced through the gloom like a warning beacon. I pulled into a nearly abandoned fuel stop that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The building was a relic, its peeling paint and rusted pumps testified to years of neglect under the harsh midnight weather. At first glance, it seemed like a haven for desperate travelers, a pit stop where even the echoes told dark stories. The only light was that erratic neon glow, casting eerie shadows across a barren, cracked parking lot. I parked my car and stepped out into the cold, damp air, my breath rising in ghostly puffs. Every footstep echoed on the asphalt as I approached the pump, feeling both drawn in and deeply uneasy. The silence around me was punctuated only by the soft hum of a distant generator and the whisper of wind in the dead trees. I wasn't alone there, or so I thought. I reached for the pump, its metal surface cold and unyielding, and put the nozzle in my car's tank. Almost immediately, the pump sputtered, flickering with sparks as if protesting my presence. A low, static-filled murmur came through the overhead speaker, a voice that sounded both distant and intimately close. "Top off the fuel? Before it's too late?" My skin prickled and I jerked my hand away. The voice was faint but unmistakable, a warning or a plea that sent shivers along my spine. I glanced around. The attendant's booth stood dark and empty, with its glass front reflecting only the jagged neon light. I felt something intangible, a presence that hovered just beyond the edges of perception. I refueled in silence, every drip of fuel echoing like a countdown. As I paid at the dusty cash register, I noticed that the numbers on the display flickered in disjointed sequences. There was no sign of a human attendant, only a shadow shifting in the corner of my eye near the counter. That fleeting silhouette dissolved into darkness as quickly as it appeared, leaving me more paranoid than before. I stepped back outside with my receipt trembling in my hand, and that's when the real terror began. The neon sign buzzed erratically and then went out entirely, plunging the lot into an almost total blackout.
A sudden, icy wind swept over the parking lot, carrying with it a scent of damp decay and old regrets. I hurried back to my car, my heart pounding in my ears, as if trying to drown out a distant, mournful hum. Halfway to my vehicle, I heard it, a soft scraping sound from behind the fuel pump, like metal grinding against metal. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the murky dark, but saw nothing except the twisted shadows of the derelict building.
Then a chorus of whispers began, low and overlapping, murmuring indistinguishable words that sent chills straight to my soul. "Don't drive away. Don't forget us." They seemed to chant in the dying light. My instincts screamed to flee, but curiosity and dread kept my feet rooted to the spot. I looked around desperately, trying to find the source of the voices, when I noticed a pair of eyes glimmering momentarily in the reflective surface of a nearby pump. The eyes, pale and haunting, disappeared as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving only an echo of sorrow in their wake. I backed away slowly, the sound of my own breathing heavy in the oppressive silence. Inside my car, I tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and stalled as if reluctant to run under the weight of the night's mystery. I fumbled with the keys, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What was that voice? Who were those eyes? And why did everything feel like it was peeling away the veneer of reality to reveal a darker truth? A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the gas station in stark relief, casting long, trembling shadows that danced like specters on cracked concrete. In that split second of brightness, I saw a figure, a gaunt man in ragged clothes, standing near the cashier's booth, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't move or speak. He simply stood there, watching with hollow eyes before disappearing into the dark. The sight sent a terror so profound I nearly slammed the car door. I managed to start the car eventually, but the engine's growl was now mixed with a low hum, a tone that seemed to accompany the strange voices outside. I drove slowly, the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the lashing rain that suddenly began to fall. As I merged onto the highway, the fog thickened, and for a few heart-stopping minutes, I couldn't tell if I was still at the gas station or already miles away. The voices seemed to follow me, now muted and distorted by the car's radio static. I drove for what felt like an eternity, every twist and turn on the lonely highway deepening the mystery in my mind. At one point, I caught a glimpse of a faded billboard on the side of the road that read, "The Phantom Fuel Stop, where memories never die." My blood ran cold as I realized that the sign, like the station itself, seemed frozen in time, a relic of a forgotten tragedy. I began to wonder if the gas station was built on the grounds of a long-past accident, a collision that ended tragically and left unanswered questions. As the night wore on, I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that gaunt figure or a pair of those unsettling eyes. Every time I checked, the mirror showed only the empty highway stretching behind me, drenched in rain and shadows. But the voice, faint and insistent, still echoed in the static of the radio. "Top off the fuel before it's too late." It was as if the very soul of the fuel stop had followed me onto the road. Eventually, the rain eased and the oppressive fog began to lift, leaving me with a sense of tentative relief. I pulled off at a rest stop to collect my thoughts, my hands still shaking from the relentless terror of that midnight encounter. I sat there for hours, replaying every detail: the malfunctioning pump, the flickering neon, the disembodied voices, and that bone-chilling glimpse of a mysterious face. It felt as though I'd been marked by something that day, something that wouldn't let go even if I tried. I later learned that the gas station had a history whispered among locals like a cautionary tale. Years ago, a tragic accident occurred at that very spot, a collision that ended tragically and left many unanswered questions. Some say the attendant had been overwhelmed by guilt and sorrow, and that his spirit lingered, desperate for absolution. Others whispered that the station was a gateway, a crossroads where the living and the unseen collided under the cloak of darkness. I don't know which truth to believe, but I do know that the encounter changed me. Every so often, late at night on lonely stretches of highway, I catch a glimpse of that mysterious reflection in a shop window, or hear a whisper in the static of my radio. The memory of that phantom fuel stop is indelible, a stark reminder that some places hold on to their secrets too tightly, refusing to let go even as time marches on. If you ever find yourself stranded on a desolate highway with nowhere to turn, remember my story. That flickering neon sign may promise hope in the form of fuel, but it might also lead you to confront the lingering echoes of a tragedy long past. And when you hear the voice in the static urging you, top off the fuel before it's too late, just know that some calls from the darkness are better left unanswered.